Yeah, it's 14:30 Central European, still summertime. Very warm welcome to the Netherlands, to the city of peace and justice, The Hague. Thanks for expressing your interest in our today's topic by joining our online seminar titled Artificial Intelligence at the Crossroads, Evil or Chance. Like we usually do, I'd like to introduce you to our virtual guidelines for our today's online meeting. So please, during the entire seminar, we kindly ask you to switch off your camera and to keep your microphone muted. During the discussion, please click on the hand symbol if you would like to speak and or switch on your camera. You will find the symbol next to your name in the participant list. You may also use the chat to ask questions or to comment or to share any literature of your preference with us. Please note that the seminar presentations will be recorded and every speaker presents their own thought and expertise. For the second part of our today's meeting, meaning the Q&A session at the end, Chatham House rules apply, so this session will not be recorded for people to prevent to be shy to sneak in. That gets us to the point of introducing ourselves. To my right, you see Ms. Sonja Grünbauer. She is going to be one of the moderators of today's online seminar, and myself, Ralf Bauer, very much known to most of you joining us frequently. Yeah, welcome to this afternoon's expert session on the topic of artificial intelligence at the crossroads. Evil or chance? That's a big question to answer. And I think we will dive into that question very much. We are pleased to have with us a panel of distinguished speakers who will share their perspectives on how artificial intelligence is shaping defense, decision-making, and responsibility. We will begin with Dr. Say Schatz from the Knowledge Forge LLC, who will provide a general introduction to artificial intelligence and sets the stage for our today's discussion. She will be followed by retired Navy Captain William Combs. We will later on call him Bill, from the Baltic Defense College in Estonia, who will present the work on integrating artificial intelligence into military decision-making. After the break, Ms. Tina Sigurdardóttir from the European Centre of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats will speak about cyber threats and artificial intelligence. And finally, Dr. Clara Maathuis from the Open University in the Netherlands will address the responsible use of artificial intelligence in the military. We will conclude with our panel discussion and the Q&A session, followed by a wrap-up and the way ahead before closing at about 1700.
Thank you, Ralph, for this quick overview. Before we move on to our first presentation, let me briefly set the scope for today's topic. Artificial intelligence is no longer a futuristic concept, as we know. It is already here, actively shaping how we live, work, communicate, and defend. From language models to autonomous systems, from facial recognition to decision support tools, AI is advancing at remarkable speed, and it shows no sign of slowing down. We now stand at a decisive moment. We must ask ourselves, will AI evolve into a disruptive and destabilizing force, or can it be harnessed as a powerful enabler of progress for peace, security, and cooperation? And that is precisely what we aim to explore today. As the headlines remind us almost daily, AI is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it enables smarter logistics, faster responses to crises, and improved coordination across military and civilian domains. On the other, it opens the door to misinformation, algorithmic warfare, surveillance risk, and complex ethical dilemmas. And both of those realities must be acknowledged and addressed. And with that, I will hand back to Rolf, who will introduce our first speaker.
It's a pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Say Schatz. She works at the intersection of cognition, technology, and data. She formerly directed the Advanced Distributed Learning, so-called ADL initiative, a government program for researching learning technologies, and before joining the civil science, Say worked as an applied human systems scientist in both business and academia, including an assistant professorship with the University of Central Florida Institute for Simulation and Training. She's also a prolific writer and professional presenter. For example, she recently released Engines of Engagement, a curious book about generative AI, and contributed to the National Academics Report on Adult Learning in the Military Context. Say, thank you for being with us today. I'd like hand over to you. The stage is yours. We are looking forward to your presentation.
Hello, everybody. It's so wonderful to have you all here today. So, I was asked to give a 20-minute overview of everything you need to know about AI, which is a lot. So, let's get started. What is artificial intelligence? Technically, it is an umbrella term that covers anything a computer does that simulates human-like cognition. It goes way back, all the way to the 1950s. If you go on to the next slide, I'll show you that there are really two big types of artificial intelligence. The first is weak artificial intelligence or narrow artificial intelligence, which does one thing. For example, it searches the internet or it responds to your natural language. On the other hand, there is artificial general intelligence. Think of that as the robots coming to take over us all. It's also called strong artificial intelligence, and it's where computers can actually learn and generalize more like humans versus being programmed to do one narrow thing. But it doesn't exist yet. So let's move on, and we can talk about it later if you want to. There are different ways to develop artificial intelligence. The first, that goes all the way back to the 1950s, is symbolic AI. And you can think about this as a bunch of programmers sitting there typing out how it will actually work. What you think about more today, though, is machine learning. Machine learning is where you take data and you feed it into the computer. There are two different kinds of machine learning. The first is shallow machine learning, and that goes back several decades. That's where we took very carefully structured data. So imagine, for example, a really carefully managed Excel spreadsheet that you've kind of put all the categories into, and you feed it into the computer, and it finds patterns. But what happens is, more recently, we've figured out how to do deep learning. That's where you don't have to make that Excel spreadsheet. You can just feed any kind of email or books or documents or photos or videos into the computer, and it figures out the patterns that are within them. That is what has really unlocked the current AI revolution. So, if you're thinking about what is AI, you're probably thinking about deep learning or generative AI, which is a kind of deep learning. And that is all about finding and using patterns in complex, unstructured data. Now, technically speaking, all three of these different kinds of AI can be used in military contexts. The first one, as I already mentioned, that symbolic AI, or what's literally called good old-fashioned AI, can literally be programmed like a series of if-then statements. Now, the reason I mention this is because it first is still used, and secondly, as vendors come and talk to you, you just need to be careful that what they say, oh, this is AI, it may simply be something like that. Now, what you probably want to talk about is machine learning. So both shallow and deep learning in machine learning is all about basically the algorithm teaching itself, where you feed it a bunch of data and it figures it out itself. The key here is data. So data is the fuel for this. The key for data is that first, you have to have good enough data. You have to have a sufficient quantity and quality of data. And of course, it needs to be protected. So when people talk about bias in AI, what they're really talking about usually is that there is bias within the data set. Now, sometimes that's because we just are biased creatures, us humans. A classic example is that Amazon used machine learning to review resumes of potential new hires. And the algorithm discriminated against women. Not because they told the algorithm to discriminate against women, but because the original data set from the 1990s in Silicon Valley was biased against women, and the algorithm learned from our real inherent biases. Another example is when Microsoft created Tay Tweets. It was a chatbot from about 2016, and they released it onto Twitter. Now, you could probably think, what might happen if you release an unguarded chatbot onto Twitter and allow it to learn from its interactions with people there? You can guess that within 24 hours, they had to bring it down because it learned how to be racist and sexist and fluent in the Urban Dictionary because of all the trolls online. Now, that's a funny example, but you could also imagine in a real military or other kinds of governmental contexts where your data set might be intentionally poisoned by bad actors. But let's go on and let's just assume that you have good data. So what can you do if you have good data? Well, the thing is, and before I get into that, let me just say the thing is with all of these data, you can't go in and just like scrub the data sets. They're too big, and once they get pulled into the algorithm, they're just not interpretable. That's the black box problem. So you really have to make sure your data sets are good before they get fed into the algorithm. Once you do that with machine learning, there's really kind of three things you can do, three buckets of activities. I like to think of these across time. So for example, you can use all of this data to look at historical trends. You can find the root cause of something, or you can evaluate where something was previously. You can look at data in the moment. So you could say, okay, looking across, for example, this set of documents I have, evaluate their quality, look for holes in the argument. Or you can look towards the future. So an example might be, hey, let me forecast or predict who in my workforce might need some additional support or might be ready for promotion, and let me prescribe what kind of additional professional development or new opportunities they should get. So these are things you can do with traditional machine learning. But I know what you want to see. You want to talk about cool machine learning. You want to talk about the modern day, which is really about deep learning. Deep learning has been around for about 15 years, but of course, we've all been talking about it since the big generative AI commercial release just a few years ago. Generative AI is a kind of deep learning that basically allows you to feed in any kind of digital artifact, music, videos, documents, books, anything that you can digitize, and then it takes it into teeny tiny atomic patterns, and it creates new, but I mean, technically derivative artifacts from that. Now, here's the thing. With generative AI, anything that you can digitize in a large enough data set can be then produced through these generative AI algorithms. So in other words, you can create, as I'm sure many of you have used, right, text through things like ChatGPT and Gemini. Code, people are now using a lot of AI-based software development, music, video, speech, videos, scenarios in 3D, but also anything you can digitize. So for example, chemical and biological schema, blueprints, anything. So you can see where that might give rise to both opportunity but also risk. If you go on to the next slide, let's talk about a few questions that this all raises for the civil military community. First, now this is a small one, right? What is creativity? Is generative AI creative? I mean, in the technical sense, yes, right? It is creating something. And you might argue even that it's creating in a similar way that humans do, right? We get inspired, we create derivative artifacts. But here's the thing that I think is really a big question. If you go on to the next slide. Generative AI produces, let's say, as this example shows, text at a fraction of the cost of human developers. So as an example here from real world, a human developer might be able to write 10,000 words for about 4,000 US dollars as the going rate. And that's someone who has like a graduate degree in writing. A similar quality of AI writing is about 40 cents. That is a 99% price disruption. So the question then becomes, what does that mean for the industry of creative arts? And I don't just mean art as in like, oh, I'm making, a beautiful painting or I'm writing a poem, but I could mean anything. So I could mean textbooks, simulation-based scenarios, testing, education. On the one hand, this is great. It means that everybody can have personalized content, that we can really make sure that we're delivering, for example, my learning activity for me, your learning activity for you. You're getting the intelligence report you need. I'm getting the intelligence report contextualized to my needs that I need. That's really powerful. But at the same time, we are completely pulling the bottom out of that market. Where in the past, every single little bit of knowledge or information had a quite high price to it, right? These things were expensive artifacts, particularly if it was personalized to your context. But today, those things have almost no monetary value because they're so easy to create. Any single online Wikipedia page or YouTube video or personalized report produced by ChatGPT essentially has almost no economic cost to you now. So, on the one hand, that's so amazing for us to be able to expand and explore. But on the other, it really creates issues with questions of economic viability, reliability, and validity of content. Even when you're not talking about malicious content, just making sure that the intelligence report that I get versus the one that you get that's personalized to your context, are they still reliable and valid? Are they good enough quality? How are we doing those quality checks? And importantly, I think it raises questions about information overload. How are we making sure that we are not losing ourselves cognitively in this sea of new content, particularly when we start to talk about things like AI slop, which is the term for low quality, really fast AI generated material. It becomes overwhelming and it affects our ability to think rationally. Let's go on to the next one. The next question we might have is, from a military and civilian perspective, what is an operational unit? So it used to be, you could say, oh, I have a squad, or I have a brigade, or, I have a police force. Traditionally, we might say that in a military context, we have land, sea, air, space, and cyber. But with AI tools, we're able to orchestrate different kinds of units. And this is what's called multi-domain operations. It's the idea of basically everything everywhere all at once merged together. In other words, joint across these different domains, interagency, so that's the military and civilian interaction, international, and intergovernmental. So bringing all of those different pieces together across all the different standoff distances, tactical, strategic, across all the phases of warfare. So kinetic operations to rebuilding to even just preparation, basically happening everywhere all at once. And of course, all of this is enabled through advanced science and technology. And so that is orchestrated through AI, because AI lets us do hyper pattern analysis and that personalized navigation through complexity. So rather than having to have human operators there directing all of these very complex multi-domain operations, we can have AI orchestration tools that enable operational units to be very diverse and very large and still quite coordinated. Now that could be really quite powerful, right? So rather than having to have hierarchies and trying to have, call trees, we have these AI agents that are predictably and never tire in coordinating across all of these complex units. But you could also see where this could raise some challenges and risks. But let's go on to the next question. The last question I'd like to ask today here is, what is warfare? Now, again, if you go on, you'll see here this traditional line of warfare, which we've all talk about, right? Land, sea, air, space, and cyber. Now, AI, of course, is hyper empowering cyber activities. It's enabling criminals to write malware that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. And we've also seen, of course, since the release of ChatGPT, a huge rise in things like spam emails, phishing. Last year, there was a $1 trillion industry of spam and phishing and those kinds of cyber crimes all around the world that has been hyper escalated through these generative AI tools. We also need to be thinking about the other domain of warfare, which is cognitive warfare. So fighting within this domain. And that, of course, we've seen, if you go on to the next slide, things such as disinformation, misinformation, malinformation. Of course, we've all heard about that. Information disorder, or FIMI, which is foreign information manipulation, and influence, right? So foreign countries coming in to influence maybe a vote or otherwise change public opinion. Let me give you a real world example. According to the former Minister of Defense from Bulgaria, because of Russian disinformation campaigns in the country, they saw a 35% decrease in new applicants to the military academy and overall a 45% decrease in the number of cadets. So these campaigns have a real effect. But of course, we're not just talking about misinformation and disinformation. There's a whole wide range of activities that happen within the cognitive domain. We don't have time to cover them all here, but let me just say that AI is really amplifying a lot of these different techniques. And in fact, if you want to read more about it, I would encourage you to look at some of the NATO strategy, for example, on cognitive superiority or cognitive warfare, or the Chinese military strategy on intelligentized warfare, which really places AI and cognition at the center of the strategy. Finally, let's go on to one last comment here about the change of warfare. When you think about AI, I'd like you to think about it in combination with other emerging and disruptive technologies. For example, biotechnology or neuroscience and neurotechnology, because AI really amplifies those other technologies that are out there. And also, don't forget about AI plus AI. So I mentioned earlier that we're not at the singularity. We don't have artificial general intelligence yet, but we do have agentic AI, so agentic AI, which is where we start to string together a series of these really smart AI tools. And when you start to do that and allow them to do things like search the internet for you, book airline tickets for you, drive drones for you, you can see where, although it's not true AGI, we are really changing the nature of warfare. So if you'll go on to the last slide, I'll just summarize to say that AI really allows us to do three big things. First, it allows us to scale and ignore distance, speed, time, to scale massively. It allows us to navigate complexity, to find patterns in things that we didn't realize even existed, and to create hyper customizations of basically anything, whether that be warfare orchestration, operational orchestration, or learning or intelligence reports. AI requires us to think about new models of how we work. And I don't just mean small tinkering around the edges. I mean, do we even need hierarchical structures anymore? Or can we just have everything be flat with AI orchestration? That sounds crazy, but think about it for a minute. How do we have leadership in this age of humans plus AI? What do teams look like? Are they still all human, or are we cyborgs now in some kind of capacity? We also need to be very careful about implementation science, which is a fancy way of saying we can't just throw it out there and then hope everything works. We need to be thoughtful about how we implement things to avoid issues like information overload or other kinds of organizational failures. And finally, we need to think about the new risks that AI creates, whether those be new risk vectors, such as the cognitive warfare vector or the amplified cyber vector, or even incidental use problems, such as some of the issues that we've already seen with people having reduced attention or fear of missing out because of social media addictions caused by some of these AI-enabled algorithms. And of course, in a civil military cooperation sense, we need to think about things like asymmetric advantage towards adversarials, and also the operational surprise that might come from the combination of AI plus emerging and disruptive technologies. So in 20 minutes, there's your overview of AI. I look forward to your questions later on when we do the panel. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, I mean, let me just say thank you. I mean, for us, this is actually a tsunami of new things to learn, and I think that was to be expected. Say for the time being, thank you for that great introduction to that very, very difficult subject, to artificial intelligence as such, but also setting the scene for the next presentation. I have noticed a lot of aspects we need to kind of get back to, so I'd just like to urge our today's joinees to have their question at hand and to feed already the chat with their questions, just to have them available at the moment we call up on the Q&A session. That makes us hopping up on back to Sonia, and Sonia is probably eager to introduce our next speaker, aren't you?
Indeed I am. So let me introduce our next speaker, retired Navy Captain William Combs. Bill is a former commanding officer of a ballistic missile submarine, operations officer of a Navy Special Warfare Group, and US Navy Fellow to Oxford University. His final naval assignment included Chief of Staff for a Carrier Strike Group and Branch Head for Navy Strategy on the Pentagon staff. Currently chairing the Baltic Defense College Digital Transformation and AI Working Group, he leads practical application of human-AI collaboration in professional military education. This work connects 27 years of US Navy operational experience with International Project Management Association Level A portfolio management to develop, analyze, and share frameworks that maintain human command authority while leveraging AI capabilities. His focus is engineering transferable solutions that balance technological advancement with ethical responsibility, ensuring that the military leaders can harness AI without compromising critical thinking or strategic judgment. Bill, thank you so much for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Sonia. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I thought I gave you a short introduction. It was much longer than to my liking. But as you can tell from the slide, I'm also the Director of Leadership and Management Studies. So in a way, everything I talk about is focused through that lens. Next slide, please. So here's some visual representations of my career from Midjourney. All of the images in this presentation were generated in Midjourney. That QR code will get to my LinkedIn account. So I'll give you a couple seconds to do that. It's also on my last slide. All right, we can go to the next slide. All right, so what I'm going to talk about is VUCA Plus. I assume everyone's heard of VUCA. We'll talk about that in the next slide. So why NATO is doing digital transformation and what that means to me at the Baltic Defense College. So what we're doing with AI at the Baltic Defense College, which leads into command and control in an era of AI, and where the Baltic Defense College is going. And finally, I'll try to answer the question. Next slide, please. All right, so volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, VUCA. So VUCA, I think from Say's diagrams show how VUCA, today's military operations are, and she described how AI not only could perhaps help us solve the VUCA problem, but it also increases the challenges we face exponentially and really rapidly. So this pace of change is something that we need to deal with. And the question for me, as the Director of Leadership and Management Studies at the college, is, how do I develop leaders to handle this scenario, and what competencies do they need going forward? Next slide, please. And NATO recognized the need for this as well. So NATO is a organization made up of its member states. The militaries in NATO serve their civilian leaders. If NATO comes up with a concept, that concept has been approved by the civilian leaders in all of our nations. So Say also showed the naval warfighting capstone concept in the back of this, and the strategic concept from NATO. All talk about NATO digital transformation. Digital transformation was a response to disruptive technologies, AI being one of those disruptive technologies. And you can see, based on words taken from those concepts, it's also a solution, whether it's multi-domain operations, AI to support decision-making, facilitate political consultation and data-driven decision-making, once again, where AI can help. to foster innovation and agility, and promoting a digital culture and mindset within the Alliance. Next slide. So what does that mean for the Baltic Defense College? The Baltic Defense College is an international institution. Our major stakeholders are the 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And how do we produce officers and senior civilians who can operate in that VUCA Plus environment and succeed in our concepts that NATO has proposed? And how do we do that, considering that any of these AI systems that the military is going to get are both in the future, and the cost of those systems are going to be higher than anything that the Baltic Defense College can afford. So we're going to need to educate officers to be able to use those systems without using those systems, using the systems that we have available and the tools we have available right now. So we have a roadmap for our digital transformation. We are in the expansion phase. You can see on the left-hand side, the foundation phase that involved educating our faculty and staff on the use of AI, educating students on how to use AI, publishing use of AI policies so that our students would be doing that in an ethical manner and with academic integrity. Next slide. And then as part of our roadmap, we conducted an AI and PME workshop last February. So this February, earlier this year. So how do we systematically navigate this AI integration in PME? We had 13 organizations that include the ministries of defense of our 3 framework nations, other PME institutions in the Baltic region, NATO headquarters, in this case, SHAPE. And we explored using AI to explore AI implementation. So we were having brainstorming, feeding that information into AI and analyzing the results to come up with, where do we need to go next? How do we proceed and make changes to our roadmap and help all these other organizations with their roadmap? Next slide. So we came out of that workshop with some best and emerging practices for integrating AI in PME. I'm going to focus on the rest of this presentation in the lower left-hand corner for command and control and education. That is the topic of my presentation. But we also talked about things like building trust with AI. I mean, how do you as a military officer or a military member, how do you trust what's coming out of that black box? So how do you earn that trust? One of the things we talked about is you treat it like any other team or tool that you have in your quiver to execute your mission. You need to train and educate on it and with it. You need to practice with it, and then you deploy with it. How do we ensure the AI literacy of our faculty and students? What kind of AI framework do we develop? Do we give them? How do we take the NATO's framework, EU's education policies, NATO's policies, national policies, and how do we develop a framework for our understanding and perhaps for sharing with those organizations as we move forward together to build this? How do you handle resource management and sustainability when something's changing so fast? The typical military procurement is slow and the pace of AI is fast. So how do you implement agile or iterative project management techniques to stay apace of the technology? How do you practically implement these solutions, which is really what we're doing here at the Baltic Defense College, is trying to practically implement AI in order to teach our staff and our students how to use AI in the future. And we also came out with continuous experimentation. you need to continuously experiment with these tools to understand what's available, where that jagged frontier is, what AI is good at, what it's not good at, and which then goes back to this command and control element. Next slide. So what is AI good at, and what, more importantly, what are the human elements of leadership and command, and what we need to nurture and keep those human elements in the forefront. This teamwork between AI and humans, having AI do what it's good at, having humans do what they are good at and what they need to do. They need to lead, they have the authority, they have the responsibility, they make the decisions. While AI can help that by making it shorter timelines to developing the communications, to process the vast amount of information, to do the logistics planning, to do the environmental sensing, looking at the intelligence and any early warning we get, to feed that to human leadership for decision making. Next slide. And as we were going through this, thinking about what are then the leadership competencies that are critical in this human AI collaboration model. And we came up with 3 to start with: strategic sense making, ethical responsibility, and adaptive command, which then, as you can see in this diagram, I'm going to go through each of these separately, what AI is good at when it comes to that competency, and what the human should be doing, and what we need to make humans, what we need to be good at as leaders. Next slide. So competency 1, strategic sense making. AI capability to process multiple information sources simultaneously, identify patterns across all this data, to flag anomalies, to correlate the data to potential activities, and then providing that information to the human. So the human can execute its leadership competency by assessing the significance of those identified patterns, by applying the operational and strategic context to the data and the recommendations, and by making meaning from all of that information. And to sum that up from the workshop and our discussions, the threat analysis revealed AI excels at finding the patterns that humans might miss, but humans must judge that those patterns, what they mean for the mission. Next slide. Competency 2, ethical responsibility. AI can generate multiple response options rapidly. They can model potential outcomes and second-order effects. They can accelerate planning cycles. But humans need to evaluate ethical implications of the options. They need to apply their strategic judgment and mission command intent. Mission command is, for those not familiar, that's a military philosophy of leadership where you give your subordinates what you want, what the mission is, you give them guidelines, and you go and let them do, you let them go do it, and you don't interfere with them unless you need to, and that's based on trust. And humans need to maintain responsibility for outcomes. The workshop evidence decision-making session identified and emphasized that speed cannot compromise ethical responsibility or strategic coherence. Next slide. So for adaptive command, human leadership competency, we define objectives and strategic direction. We establish decision criteria and boundaries. We maintain command authority. AI can help us do that by monitoring the environment, by adapting to the changing conditions, being alert to deviations requiring human judgment. PMI, the PME requirements session, which I showed you the results of that earlier, identified that the most effective AI integration maintains clear human primacy in objective setting. Next slide. So what's next? So as you saw when I showed this slide earlier, we're expanding our AI because we've developed the necessary skills to our faculty. The students are using AI for their studies and in an educationally sound manner. We're working on digital transformation of our management processes, identifying key performance indicators on how to assess our success in management, in research, in our curriculum. We're developing agents to help the students and continuing to refine our policies and SOPs, and all the while upscaling our IT department, because I didn't mention we're a very small organization. We have a total of 75 staff and faculty, throughput of about 150 students, and any advantage that technology can give us to let us do our jobs more efficiently will only help us be more effective educators. And that workshop shows you that we're willing to have this knowledge hub on AI and PME, and we're expanding on that as well. And we are an unclassified organization. We work in an unclassified environment, but our main exercise is with a sensitive scenario that needs to be protected as critical unclassified information. And we're starting to roll out a server so we can have a closed network to work with some of this information and the exercise to safeguard that information. Next slide. So the focus from my point of view, because I am a director of leadership and management studies, so for PME, focal points are to ensure that we have future-focused, future-ready leaders. What is AI's, to continue to develop that, what is AI's role in command and control? How do we build that trust in AI? And part of that is evaluating the AI systems, and part of that is also on the education of the leaders so that they see the outputs of AI. Remember, this is not AI telling you what to do. This is AI giving you options, and you still need to have the cognitive and critical thinking skills to be able to evaluate that. How can AI help with wargaming and simulation? And then I think a key one is multi-domain literacy. We spend a lot of time, I know at the Hybrid Center of Excellence and elsewhere, talk about this cyber literacy or media literacy. So add to that AI literacy. I mean, these are things that are not only required in the military, they're required in our societies at large. And how do we move towards this innovative agile project management at the military government level to support the pace of change and the pace of innovation that AI brings to this problem set. All right, next slide, please. And there are obstacles. So this is all about change management, and we have those same obstacles that everyone has. So you have institutional conservatism, you have this rapid pace, which adds to the problem. Data availability and quality, it's all about data. The technical skills required, how do you build those technical skills? The course lengths haven't changed. How much time can we dedicate to this? The same people who are doing all that work, they need to build these skills. So to try to do that as efficiently as possible. Tool availability, I mentioned that SHAPE may be using a multi-million or multi-billion-dollar AI system to show data to the planning teams and the commander, but we don't have access to that. So what is it that we need to work with? What is it that smaller units or smaller countries need to work with in order to be able to thrive in this AI environment? And student mindset challenges, that goes back to cultural resistance to change. And this big thing about the student mindset challenges is the same with anyone using AI. If you just feed the question into AI, take the result and run with it, you're not applying your critical thinking. You are not building. We are not educating you if you're just taking AI's output and using it. So yes, that's easy, but you need to be able to think for yourself as well. And as our roadmap shows, our response is a systematic, phased approach with continuous learning to all of these obstacles. Next slide. So AI, evil or chance? My statement would be it's perhaps can be used for AI. It can be used for evil, but it's also part of the solution. So my question that I normally ask, or what I have students research is, is AI or our technologies, are they a threat or an opportunity? And I think that AI is both a threat and an opportunity, and it is both an evil or a chance. And in that way, we need to be proactive to make sure that we can harness AI to do what we need it to do, and at the same time to block those who want to use it for evil. And I don't know about the timing, so if there's time for questions, I'm happy to take them. If not, I'll look forward to the question and answer period that's following the next two presentations.
Okay, what a great start. I would say we leave all the questions to the end for the Q&A session. Yeah, and with that, I think we all deserve a little break. So let's have a 5 minutes break. Please feel free to stretch your legs, to have a little coffee, or you can even look at your phone. We're not judging. So we will be back in about 5 minutes at around 15:25. And we see you in a few minutes.
Yeah, welcome back to our today's online seminar on artificial intelligence at the Crossroads, evil or chance. That kind of question was kind of touched upon by Bill, and we got a possible reaction and answer to it. However, let's keep that in mind for a while. I hope you had the chance to stretch your leg and recharge a little bit. So we'd like to go ahead and get started with the next part of our session, where we look into the cyber domain. Ms. Tinna Sigurðardóttir is the Icelandic secondment to the Hybrid Center of Excellence, seconded by the Icelandic Minister of Foreign Affairs. She works on the intersection of cyber, emerging technology, and hybrid threats. Prior to joining the center, she was the threat intelligence-based ethical red teaming for Iceland Tiber IS test manager at the Central Bank of Iceland, where she managed scenario-based red team tests for financial institutions. Tinna has experience working in threat research, data science, and cybersecurity monitoring and defense. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Psychology and a Computer Science, and a Master of Science in Language Technology and Artificial Intelligence. And with having said that, I pass the ball on to Tinna, who will guide us through the next topic. So we're really looking forward to listen to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. I would like to approach today's topic from the perspective of hybrid threats. Next slide, please. The next one. So to illustrate hybrid threats, we like to use the model called the core model. It defines 13 domains that fall within 3 spaces and 3 layers. The spaces being civic, governance, and services, and the layers representing the sectors and levels of society. At the center, we have the foundations of democratic society, which are the ultimate targets of hybrid threats. The goal of hybrid threat actors is to undermine democratic principles. And as we can see on the next slide, we have the 7 core foundations of democracy, which are the ones being targeted. Next slide, please. But what makes a threat hybrid? A hybrid threat, it has many different definitions, and our approach has been to not use any set definition because of the nature of hybrid threats. So in their nature, it's multiple threats that are coordinated and synchronized actions. They target systematic vulnerabilities. They use a wide range of means. They exploit thresholds of detection and attribution, exploit the borders between war and peace, internal and external, public and private. And it's often difficult to determine whether an incident is a part of a hybrid threat or not. And it can also be very difficult to attribute. Next, please. Hybrid threats can also be military or non-military. There can be covert or overt. They include things like disinformation, cyber attacks, economic pressure, irregular armed groups, and regular forces. And they blur the lines between war and peace. They are usually under the threshold of what we would call a overt, direct, targeted threat to any state. But their aim is to sow doubt in the minds of the target population and to cause fear and chaos. Next, please. And hybrid threats are not new, but they have grown in scale and reach. And they are more than just a conflict between militaries. They promote distrust. They aim to weaken the state and its society. And it's a cheaper and more effective way than a direct attack on a state. Next, please. If we look at some examples of cyber-related hybrid threats, it could be any type of cyber attack, such as phishing, ransomware, wipers, DDoS, often combined with disinformation campaigns, insider threats, or supply chain attacks. Next, please. So here's one example that we've seen in the news recently. It was a breach of UK Electoral Commission. The breach was discovered in October 2022, but the initial breach was determined to have been over a year earlier, so in August 2021. There's been a public report published on this, where the UK government formally blamed China for this attack, which is rare to see such attribution. The data compromised covered personal data from over 40 million of voters in the UK and electoral registers from 2014 to 2022. Next, please. So as we heard earlier, AI works as an amplifier, and this is true for cyber threats and also for hybrid threats. The frequency, the speed, and the scope has been amplified. Language barriers have been removed, and the skills required to create content, to use these AI tools to code, have been lowered substantially. Next, please. Next. So if we look at hybrid warfare, much as we heard earlier about cognitive warfare, it's about subduing your enemy without fighting, as was made famous by The Art of War. Next, please. So the idea is to defeat your enemy mentally without having to attack directly. And we look at 4 characteristics of hybrid warfare. There is more than one event. the intent is malign. The attack is by an authoritarian regime against a democratic state. And it is below our threshold of war. Next, please. So let's have a look at how artificial intelligence has been used in the hybrid threat area. Next. So as I said earlier, speed efficiency has been increased and amplified. Information has been made actionable. Group behaviors are mimicked, influenced, and altered. Social and economic effects are being shaped. Facial recognition, biometrics, and other signature recognition has been helpful as well. Next, please. AI has been used in disinformation to create content and to translate content. Also to clone content from legit news websites to other less legitimate websites. AI images have been created or images have been manipulated with AI. There's been more personalization and micro-targeting. And again, the target here is to cause chaos, to polarize societies, and to cause fear. Next, please. So here we can see some examples of how AI-generated content has been used. And it is often used to target minorities or underrepresented groups, such as female candidates, political candidates, by targeting them as by pornographic images or the like. Yeah, here are more examples. Next, please. There have also been tools specifically developed for malicious intent. And here we see some examples of large language models that have been developed for malicious use. For example, we have fraud GTP, which is used to write malicious code. Worm GTP, which is used for writing phishing emails. Dark BART, which is trained on material from the dark web. Wolf GPT, used to write malware and advanced phishing. And XXX GPT, which is a toolbox for remote access Trojans and botnets. Next, please. There have also been reports of Moscow-based groups attempting to do some sort of LLM grooming, where they have been using disinformation campaigns that are aimed at large language models rather than at people. So they have registered multiple domains and used SEO and made it metadata to make the LLMs pick up on their websites for the training. And they have been successful to some point in spreading their propaganda to these large language models that we commonly use. Next, please. then we can also see examples of large language models that intentionally censor themselves, even in real time. So on the right of this slide here, you see an example from a journalist that asked DeepSeek in the early stages about some sensitive topics. And you can see that at first it completely censors itself and refuses to answer. But when asked again, it modifies itself and answers in a way that would be, let's say, permitted or approved of by the Chinese Communist Party. Next, please. Other issues to be aware of are things like the data collection that these models use. What data do these models gather? For example, DeepSeek has been seen to gather user input, device data, IP addresses, and even keystroke patterns, which has raised concern about privacy and potential behavior profiling. It has also been connected to ByteDance, that is using ByteDance analytics and monitoring services, suggesting potential data sharing. As well, we see that the data is stored in China. All collected data is stored on servers in the People's Republic of China, making it subject to Chinese data laws and potential government access. And we need to be aware of the implications that could have. Next, please. That concludes my presentation for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was super interesting. There were so many informations I didn't know, so, well. But yeah, let's move on to our next presentation of the day before we start with our Q&A later on. Therefore, I would like to introduce Dr. Clara Matois. I'm sorry for the mispronunciation. I'm not originally Dutch, so I tried my best. She's assistant professor in AI and cybersecurity at Open University in the Netherlands. Clara holds also a PhD in AI and military cyber operations from the TU Delft and conducts research on building responsible AI and trustworthy AI systems in the military, cybersecurity, and social media domains. At the same time, she develops and teaches courses such as responsible AI, machine learning, generative AI, and security and AI. Clara, thank you so much for joining, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Also, thank you for the invitation to be here today. It is a pleasure to see you all and to be able to engage with you. I already heard so many nice aspects and dimensions of AI. Today, I would like to go to a short introduction about what responsible AI actually means, how we translate that to building responsible AI systems in the military domain, reflect on where do we go, what would be the future dimensions that we need to consider at this moment in time, and then reflect together with you on some conclusive remarks and questions at the end of the session. Next slide, please. Yes, maybe we can go directly to the next slide to show you a bit of work. So mainly I work on building responsible AI indeed in the military domain, so let's say positions in the targeting cycle, focusing more on the target selection and target engagement, so looking at, for instance, engagement of AI systems in a conflict, in a military context, but also how AI could be used to build responsible systems, responsible intelligent cyber weapons in offensive military cyber operations. Next slide, please. So, for instance, I work a lot on collateral damage, proportionality assessment, but also in disinformation detection and generation context. For instance, we see here the use of machine learning and LLMs for understanding the narratives, understanding the discourses, emotions, the emotional landscape of the victims. Next slide, please, to show you something. We see here some of the topics that are being discussed on the left side with blue, and then we see two diagrams which capture the sentiments, the feelings of Ukrainian people, Ukrainian victims, people in the conflict. In the left side with machine learning and deep learning, let's say standard methods, and on the right side with large language models development. And an interesting point that came from this research was the fact that actually LLMs managed to gather, let's say, a much more representative landscape of emotions when compared to concrete real events. And also that was corresponding to trustable sources like NATO, UN, EU, UNDR, and so on. So it was very interesting to see that they were actually able to capture more dimensions, let's say more deep sensitive aspects in the narratives, and various levels of emotions that people experienced. And of course, that could be explained to the fact that they are trained on a much higher body of data, and of course they also have the optimization element that helps a lot in this regard. Next slide, please, because I realized that I have a bit too many slides. Just to point out from here, to build on what the previous colleagues mentioned in the nice presentations, why we also see AI, let's say, as a good and a very, let's say, a set of tools and instruments that we could use in a beneficial way. And then we also see various risks and challenges. That is the fact that probably technology, just as humans, also have this dual nature. So they have a positive and bring a positive contribution to building intelligent systems, while also bringing some unintended, unpredictable, uncertain consequences. Next slide, please. But what do we actually refer when we discuss about responsible AI? We already saw various dimensions previously. We aim to build these systems in an ethical way. To this dimension, we also add the societal norms that need to be accounted, as well as legal frameworks and guidelines that need to be included and respected. And we say that we hope to reach to an alignment between ethical, legal, social norms, values, and frameworks that need to be included and respected by these AI systems across the life cycle of their development. And to start with the first dimension, we discuss about transparency. They need to be transparent in relation to the data that is being used, or maybe the knowledge that is being, let's say, underlying into the rules that were defined in their functioning mechanism, or let's say the combination between the data and knowledge, if we discuss about hybrid AI systems or neurosymbolic systems. Then we need to understand their reasoning, their functioning mechanisms at local level. So let's say in relation to a specific part of the data that is being used in the training, fine-tuning, or validation processes, but also in relation to what actually the prediction that is being made, that result or recommendation that is being proposed actually means in a given context to a specific user. Next slide, please. Then we have the governance dimension. It is not enough just to say that we have a well-defined scope and then that we just propose a transparency. So we build explainable AI methods that would allow us to understand how the system works and properly interpret the results obtained. We need to apply governance metrics and measures across this life cycle, and to make sure that this is done while also fairness is taken into account. And that means that we need to define a taxonomy of potential biases at data level, at knowledge level, during development, during validation, at human level, context level, and so on. So we have this bias definition, and then we couple metrics and methods that would allow us to understand, to measure, and to be able to detect and further mitigate biases during development and deployment. Next slide, please. To this, another dimension is the, let's say, more complex dimension of security, safety, privacy, reliability. So we want to make sure that these systems are effective in the way that they were defined, are robust and reliable to both intended and unintended threats that may aim to change their behavior or to alter their result. To do also that, it is important to acknowledge the fact that we require a human-centric approach. And this means that the needs, the expectations, the goals, as well as various context dimensions that humans, the operational setting, and the overall context have, need to be accounted from the design phase of the AI system. Next slide, please. And then we go and say it is not enough just to build these systems in a responsible way, but they also need to be safe, robust, reliable, so they need to be trustworthy. Next slide, please. And a proper way to do this actually comes in the AI domain from the cybersecurity domain. So thinking in terms of risks. And it is interesting because in the cybersecurity domain actually also comes from the financial domain. So I would say that this risk perspective, which we also see, for instance, in the EU AI Act, is the fact that we need to recognize risks when possible, and we need to map those risks to each of the elements that compose the AI system, so data, software, hardware level, computational resources being used, communication protocols, but also to do not forget the weakest link, the humans, the stakeholders involved or impacted by their actions. So we do this mapping, like we see here in this table, across the life cycle of the AI system. And a way that helps us is by formulating questions. So we formulate questions to ourselves while engaging in these phases, and then we provide answers on this behalf. Next slide, please. So we saw that it is not enough just to think, let's say, in technical terms, also not enough to count ethical dimensions, but we also need to respect corresponding legal, societal frameworks and guidelines corresponding to the level of conflict or situation, incident, where that system is positioned and used. Next slide, please. To these dimensions, other aspects need to be considered as well. Of course, first would be the strategic and operational context, as well as national security, international security dimensions. Let's say the ongoing fight between important, let's say, state and non-state actors in this arms race dynamics, understanding the dynamics in this development, but also understand the fact that we need collaboration between military and civilian actors at local level, let's say national, NATO level, and also engaging with other friendly and neutral actors as well. Next slide, please. And to these dimensions, also to add is the importance of human oversight. So we need to be able to see when specific degrees of autonomy are necessary, what we would provide to the human agent, maybe that human agent represents a decision maker, but what should actually the AI system do? The AI agent, what kind of autonomy level should have? When should it have, let's say, a low degree of autonomy, and when should it go to a high level or maybe even full autonomous? It depends on the task, of course, that it needs to achieve. So we need to understand the definition of these levels, but also how to negotiate these levels depending on the scope, the goals that these agents actually have. Next slide, please. And to do that also, we need to account the ongoing, let's say, international security dynamics, existing trends, not only at technical level, but also responsible innovation level, as well as sustainability, collaboration, and engaging further with different, let's say, actors, state and non-state actors, that through this democratization of technology are able to achieve amazing results with a limited amount of time and resources. Next slide, please. And here also to mention another dimension is the proper framing of the current situation and the understanding at the moment, are we actually now in a conflict situation? Would it be properly to start de-escalating a situation, or how we would be able to predict proper and relevant measures and methods that would allow or will prevent further conflict or would provide optimal ways to de-escalate in a specific conflict. Of course, to do that also, we should respect the principles of the IHL, the international humanitarian law, for instance, accounting human rights law, and other legal frameworks and bodies that would be supportive. And of course, in relation to AI, this represents maybe even a higher challenge when compared to other operational domains, because we even struggle at this moment to define what is a proper attack, what would we consider as an object under IHL in relation to an AI system. But of course, what is the meaning of collateral damage? How would you decide? What would be the threshold to decide when an attack would be proportional or not? So we have a lot of aspects and dilemmas to deal with and to further engage in a military-civilian context. Next slide, please. Of course, to mention here as well is the fact that AI systems themselves are per definition software systems, and that means that they are vulnerable. As I was mentioning, they include data, knowledge, communication protocols, hardware, various parameters and hyperparameters and so on, but they do remain software systems, and they are developed with engagement of human actors, which makes them vulnerable. That means that they are vulnerable to various types of attacks, so we need to have a broader understanding and a proper definition of a taxonomy of attacks to be able to define measures and countermeasures that would prevent such attacks from various, let's say, adversaries. Then this also should be taken into account, not just at local level, but also as, let's say, considering the intense connection and dynamism of ongoing networks at global level. So a concrete mapping in time, space, and force should be taken into account. Next slide, please. And so now that we saw some dimensions, how we reflect, let's say, more in the military domain, like I was mentioning, we need to do that and have a clear mapping of these dimensions, not just at singular level, or we should not just see these dimensions as, let's say, independent aspects that military AI systems should have in order to be properly developed, deployed, and used in a responsible way. But actually, these dimensions need to be developed together along the life cycle of an AI system. And to do that, we also need to understand other types of challenges. For instance, if we want to build a system that is transparent, so we want to build explainable AI methods for a military AI system, then we would have an issue in terms of fairness or security and privacy, because we might need to expose and to, let's say, have a trade-off with other values that the system should have in order to be labeled as responsible. And then on the other side, if we want to make sure that we have a privacy-preserving system under the responsible AI paradigm, we know that there are issues in relation to fairness. So we might deal with some potential biases, and that also might bring some exposure to sensitive information, and so on. Next slide, please. So we say that as we also discuss in relation to other dimensions, we discuss about security by design, privacy by design, human oversight by design, autonomy by design, and so we also discuss about responsibility by design that can be done through a multi-stakeholder engagement in a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, or transdisciplinary approach, while also taking into account an important phase of development, which is often in general in the software engineering perspective, let's say, left behind, the importance of testing, validation, verification. So if in development we may have a limited space of options, how well or how optimal we would build an AI system. In relation to testing, this space is infinite. We might find so many, let's say, ways, use cases, and test cases that might prove us that the system is still vulnerable. So special dedication also needs to be considered on this behalf. Next phase, please. Then what we need to do that, we need to do that through collaboration, through confidence measures, maturity levels, and frameworks that need to be developed at both singular level for each of these dimensions, and while combining them together in relation to the life cycle of this system. Next slide, please. And of course, another important dimension in relation to the data elements, so reflecting a bit at each component level, make sure that the data is representative. Make sure that the data has, let's say, an optimal quality, that various checking mechanisms that consider both technical as well as human engagement are applied across the whole life cycle of the governance framework. Next slide, please. And this also implies in this human-centric and responsible AI approach, also including the human. So having the human in the loop in all these phases. And of course, just as autonomy levels can be defined and negotiated in relation to the task and the context where the system needs to function or needs to be deployed and used, the human in the loop can also be defined in a human AI thinking scenario, depending where the system should actually function. Doing that, also important it is the fact that a direct relation should be considered in relation to potential military neutral friendly actors or civilian, for instance, infrastructure that is connected or might be in the same network or might use some specific services as that AI system that is being used. So that, of course, in order to prevent potential collateral damage. Next slide, please. And to do that, we also heard about some contextual dimensions. The sensitivity of the mission is important as well. That also helps us to understand which of these dimensions of responsibility need to be put with high priority for a military AI system, but also how they should be defined and how this would contribute to the achievement of the military objectives defined. Also to do that, we need to make sure that we have through the transparency components and the execution of these systems, we need to make sure that we have some checks and some, let's say, some efficient way to assess the results or the effects produced in an optimal way to be able to extract potential lessons learned in the assessment phase of the operation that we can carry out, maybe going back in the cycle for planning and execution, or maybe just having them as final lessons learned. Next slide, please. So we say when we discuss about humans, the role of various stakeholders, so either the ones that are engaged and involved in the design, development, and deployment, but also the ones that use that system, let's just say they just buy a system or may be affected by these systems, it is important to build an ethical culture. It is important to have a concrete way of engagement with other parties and to have to give space to the uncertainty and not being able to predict at all times the potential effects that these systems would have through engagement from these various stakeholders across military and civilian space. Next slide, please. And then if we saw at data system, software level, so let's say more technical side of the AI systems and human level, as well as context, we also need to see these elements at team level, because at the end, we form teams. We are not, let's say, at the stage at this moment, especially with the upcoming developments in the generative AI domain, we actually landed in a human AI teaming scenario. So we also need to understand the dynamics and the, let's say, narratives that the AI agents have between themselves. So while through transparency and the applicability of explainable AI methods, we are able to receive some kind of feedback from the AI system. Of course, explanations need to be tailored to the need of the users. We as humans also need to provide feedback back, and the system would be nice to be adaptive and intelligent enough to adapt its own behavior and to go and continue functioning in the loop. Next slide, please. So this allows us to consider dimensions and not just at the individual level for these agents, but at team level, and then discussing these dimensions of responsibility as well as autonomy, control, feedback elements between the teams. So we can provide different levels to these human and AI agents and see when these levels might change during the, let's say, development, deployment, and use of the AI systems. Next slide, please. And then we say that responsibility should be used, or actually this ethical culture will not finish when the system is deployed and is being used, but also further in its execution as monitoring activities are necessary to be applied. It could be the case that after a while, maybe 3, 6, 9 months, 1 year, we might have some issues where we see that the system is not optimal, its behavior is changing, will not be as effective as it was developed or as it was once with a high accuracy. We might see that the model is dropping in terms of effectiveness. So we might deal with a model or concept drift, and then might be the case that we need to go back in the loop. So that's why framing all the phases of the life cycle is very important. We might even need to go back to design, or we might just need to retrain the model, refine the model, or just consider additional use cases and test cases to make sure that the system would function in an effective way, compliant with the operational needs further on. Next slide, please. And here to see a bit some of the work done on responsible and trustworthy human AI teaming in military operations. We see here some models and some simulations, but what we see maybe, let's say, on a high level on the right side, we need to account to understand the context dimensions, the teaming elements, negotiation, for instance, of autonomy, control, and feedback, what kind of guidelines, requirements, norms, and values we need to take into account in the development and deployment, as well as use processes, and also how do we relate these to the effects that these systems would have. And then where do we go further? Difficult to say, but also we are a bit lucky due to the fact that we are in this, let's say, world, and we try to bring a positive and constructive contribution to this stage. We see that autonomy is becoming more and more important, and more systems are having at this moment a high level of autonomy, or have even they are even full autonomous. So we need to go to a guided autonomy. We need to properly negotiate autonomy and to make these systems from just being intelligent and having as much as possible an optimal behavior, they need to be adaptive across their life cycle. And then, of course, we also need to understand that let's say the upcoming biotech resources also need to be accounted. We are also searching for new ways, new energy solutions, new models in order to optimize the design, the architectures, and the impact that these neural architectures have. Again, going back to the biological aspects and models that we have. And then we discuss about responsible innovation, and then we discuss about responsible AI. But then it is about responsible engineering, because AI will become more and more self-aware. We will see how far, sorry, it will go towards true AGI. But no matter if it's just about small tasks that would be able, and it is able at this moment, to rewrite and engineer itself, we are the ones that would further bring responsibility in this self-engineering process as well. Next slide, please. To conclude, what would remain to say as the concluding remarks? This whole perspective, the commands that we as humans and the AI systems have, of course, needs to be developed, deployed, and used in an ethical, in a social and legal way, relying and being compliant with relevant norms, values, guidelines, principles, and frameworks that we have. But we also need to take into account that these systems are very dynamic, are changing, and also the fact that we as humans change with them as well. Then also the fact that the responsibility aspect are actually not, let's say, characteristic, has so many dimensions, as we have seen, and each of these dimensions need to be understood at singular and individual level, but also they need to relate to each other and need to be implemented at global level. And then also the fact that as we want these systems to, let's say, have a positive and constructive, responsible evolution, we also need to understand that it is about this merge between the human agents and AI agents that need to have together responsible co-evolution. Thank you so much. I'm happy to engage with you in discussions and questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara, for this, impressive presentation. There were so many interesting aspects in it. I think I can speak for both of us.
Definitely.
With that, before we dive into the Q&A session, we will have another 5 minutes break just to freshen up our mind a little bit, to shoot all the questions that we might have. For that, we will see us back at around 16:15. And then, we'll be happy to dive into all your questions. See you in a few minutes.